Hello friends, now let us start with the next part of your indirect taxation where the focus will be on your customs. Friends, few important things that we have to know before we start with your customs. Right, customs is a very scoring subject, though the number of marks rather for customs and your foreign trade policy, right, is 25 marks. It's highly scoring. There are few myths associated with customs which students fail to understand. Customs is rather a very simple subject, more about procedure. Concepts are there but very limited. It's more about your procedure. So that being the case, it is very scoring subject. Very scoring subject when you talk about customs and your foreign trade policy. Right, and you have to understand one more thing, that there are a lot of topics rather which ICAI sometime back has said that they are not applicable for your final. So all those topics where by-hearting was required, like your offences and penalties, appeals and revisions, advance ruling, settlement commission, they are not applicable for your exams. So that being the case, customs has become much more simple because those were the areas where you had to by-heart a lot of points. Right, even if it was there, it was simple, you have to compare GST and customs. Now it is not there. So that being the case, you have to understand that customs is very simple topic. Now friends, in your ICA module, customs has been bifurcated into around 7 to 8 chapters. Right, but we are going to discuss that in 16 chapters. Right, rather directly doubled. Now friends, we have bifurcated our discussion into 16 chapters. This is in your ICA module. This is in your module where you are going to talk about your study, revise and crack. Right friends, the discussion is given into small subtopics so that things are very simple. So you have to understand that don't look at the number of chapters that are there in customs in our module and compare it with ICA. Rather you will find many things very simplified in our module. Few things that we do not find it right, rather the ICA module has given the presentation beautifully. Right, now when you talk about few things where we found that things could have been given much better is first bifurcation of topics. You have a topic called as procedures which talks about a lot of things. Import procedure, export procedure, transit, transshipment, post and stores. You are talking about a lot of other concepts, audit assessment. So that makes a student difficult to understand where he is focusing on. So we have bifurcated the topics. Second thing, there are few cases, there are a lot of case laws, small case laws that are there, where we found that case laws are given in the end of the topic without knowing for what the students is reading case law. Students will end up reading case law. Plus few case laws are given and test your understanding, rather the last part where the questions are being asked. So there you will not understand this case law is related to which provision, therefore the entire understanding of case law will not be there. So case laws, first we have bifurcated the chapters into number of chapters. Secondly, what we have done is we have made sure that all these points, when you talk about all the case laws, they are given at right place, right point, so that your understanding of case law is very simple. Case laws are beautiful, right? You have to just understand law, and if you are very clear with law, case laws will be piece of cake. Alright, now let us start with the introduction topic. Your customs in India, just like we started with GST in India. Customs in India, very simple topic, just an introduction, rather only to ensure that you are able to link all those things that we have discussed in GST. Very simple point, your customs in India. Basic topic. Friends, we have already discussed what is the meaning of law. Law is combination of 3 C's. Law is always combination of 3 C's. Your code, your customs and your case laws. Code plus customs plus case laws. What is codes, friend? Coding is nothing but your constitution plus act plus rules plus regulations plus notifications. That is coding. If you remember, we have discussed this even in your GST, in GST in India. Code, law is equal to code, customs and case laws. Coding is equal to your constitution, act, rules, regulations and your notifications. Right. And what is customs, friends? Customs is the old practices, traditions. The old practices or the traditions that we are talking about your customs. Right. And friends, our focus will be on what, friends? Will be on code and case laws. Friends, in GST the focus was only on code. Right, we have not discussed much about your customs. Here the focus will be on code plus case laws. Right, now we will tell then why the customs or the tradition is important. When you are actually practicing the subject, then you will understand, okay, certain customary practices also holds good. Right, so in GST the focus was entirely on coding, whereas here the focus will be on code and case laws. In GST we did not discuss case laws because GST is a very new subject. where we have to wait for the High Court and Supreme Court to give some judgments on GST. I'm not talking about writ petition and special leave petition, where High Court and Supreme Court have already given judgments. I'm talking about the normal appeal channel. So it will take some time for case laws to be there in your GST syllabus. Are there High Court and Supreme Court judgments in GST? Yes, they are there, but not by way of your GST law remedy. It is by way of constitutional remedy that few people or few companies have filed your writ petition and special leave petition under Article 136 and Article 226 respectively. We are not discussing about that. Here the focus will be on code and case laws. Friends, most of the decisions that we are going to discuss will be of Supreme Court. Most of the decisions or case laws that we are going to discuss in customs will be of Supreme Court. So Supreme Court judgments are nothing but the law of the land. Supreme Court judgments or decisions are nothing but law of the land, and it is applicable throughout India. Whereas when you talk about High Court judgments, they are not law of the land. They are actually applicable only in the respective states. Supposing there is a Gujarat High Court judgment, it is binding on the assessees in Gujarat. It is binding on the assessees in Gujarat. Can other assessees from other states like Maharashtra can follow it? They can take the help of it, but it is not binding on them. They can take the help of it. They can use that judgment for arguing their case. They can use Gujarat High Court. Maharashtra assessee can use Gujarat High Court judgment for arguing their case. That is possible. But prima facie Gujarat High Court judgment is binding only in Gujarat. Right. However, for central law like GST, High Court judgments can be relied upon across India, which means I was trying to tell this point. When you talk about Supreme Court judgment, it is law of the land, it is binding on entire India. When it is High Court judgment, say for example Gujarat High Court judgment, it is binding only on the assessees and departmental officers in Gujarat. Can others use it for their purposes for fighting their case? Yes. Because we are talking about GST law and customs law being central law, they are not state law, central act. The act is uniform across India. Other assessees, say for example an assessee in Maharashtra can take the help of Gujarat High Court judgment for fighting his own case. An assessee in Maharashtra can take the help of Gujarat High Court judgment for fighting his own case. So it can be relied upon, it is not binding, but it can be relied upon. Right, that is all about your law. When you talk about code, customs and case laws. Code, customs and case law. One very important new point that you discussed. Supreme Court judgments, again, if you recollect correctly, case laws are not giving any new law. Case laws are only interpretation of law. Case law always symbolizes only interpretation of your law. Right. Therefore, they will not tell anything new. They will interpret the law in a better manner. If it is Supreme Court judgment, everyone in India has to follow that. Law of the land. If it is any High Court judgment, then supposing Gujarat High Court judgment, it is binding on all the assessees in Gujarat as well as the departmental officers having jurisdiction in Gujarat. Right. Whereas when you talk about a Maharashtra assessee, whether for Maharashtra assessee Gujarat High Court judgment will be binding? No. But can he rely upon that Gujarat High Court judgment for fighting his case? Yes. Even a Maharashtra assessee can rely upon Gujarat High Court judgment for fighting his own case. Why? Because your GST law as well as customs law is a central law where the law is the same. So Maharashtra assessee can take the help of or can rely upon or can use Gujarat High Court judgment for fighting his own case. So when he is fighting his case, he will tell that see, already this matter was there in Gujarat High Court and Gujarat High Court gave the judgment in favor of assessee. So he can use that. Right. That is the basic point when you talk about law, code, customs and case laws. Friends, when you talk about your code, code is nothing but your constitution. Code is nothing but you are talking about your constitution plus act plus rules plus regulations plus notifications. So you are talking about code being nothing but constitution, act, rules, regulations and notification. Now this time we are talking from the angle of customs. Now friends, the base article which was giving rise to GST was Article 246A. And here in customs, the article which gives birth to customs we have discussed even in GST in India is entry number 83 of your list 1 of schedule 7 in terms of Article 246. So you are talking about the birth is given by your Article 246. This is birth is given by your Article, not 246, Article 246, not 246A, 246. Under Article 246, read along with your schedule 7, you are talking about schedule 7 list 1 entry number 83, entry number 83. And when you talk about that particular article, it talks in a very simple manner. Duties of customs including export duties. Duties of customs including your export duty. Normally it is only import duty, but at very rare cases you have even export duty. So duties of customs including export duties. That is a very simple entry given under entry number 83 of your list 1, that is union list, where only parliament has got the rights to make law, of your schedule 7 read along with your article 246. Article 246. One important observation: the birth of customs is by virtue of article 246 read along with schedule 7 covered under list 1, that is union list, where only parliament has got the right to make law, and you're talking about entry number 83, which talks in a very simple manner: duties of customs including your export duties. What are the base acts of customs? There are 2 base acts. That is all about your constitution. That is all about your constitution. When you talk about act, the base act is Customs Act 1962, which we have taken reference in GST a lot of times. Customs Act 1962, along with the tariff act called as Customs Tariff Act 1975. Along with the tariff act called as Customs Tariff Act 1975, which talks about your rates of import duty, which is there for a lot of goods, and rate of export duty, which is very rare. Export duty is very rare, but it is there. Export duty is very rare, but it is actually there. So for few items even export duty is there. Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 of your customs excuse me, of your Customs Tariff Act 1975, Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 talks about your import duty and export duty respectively. Now when you talk about rules, now friends, understand that there are a lot of rules in customs, but base rules which are important rules that are applicable for your exams are 3. Your valuation rules, your procedural rules being baggage rules, and drawback rules. Your valuation rules, you have import valuation, determination of value of imported goods rules 2007. Likewise, you have export valuation, determination of value of export goods rules 2007. So you have 2 valuation rules: import valuation rules 2007 and export valuation rules 2007. Procedural rules, you have very important procedural rules by name of baggage rules 2016. Baggage rules 2016. And drawback rules, you have 2 sets of drawback rules, because you have 2 drawback, one under section 74, one under section 75. One is re-export of imported goods. Re-export of imported goods, duty drawback of import duty. Rules, very old rule 1995. And the new set of rule, which is customs and central excise duties. The wording is customs and central excise duties drawback rules 2017, which is a recent one. Right. If you look at valuation rules, there are 2 set of valuation rules that you have to go through, which is very all these rules are extremely important. Rather, you can understand that around I'm just giving an estimate, 8 marks comes from these 3 rules. Right. Your valuation rules, which has got 2 parts: import valuation, determination of value of imported goods rules 2007, export valuation, determination of value of export goods rules 2007. We have your procedural rule where you're talking about baggage rules 2016. We have your drawback rules where you're talking about old drawback rule for section 74, new drawback rule for section 75. That is old drawback rule, re-export of imported goods bracket. You're talking about duty drawback of import duty close bracket rules 1995, and another set of drawback rules, new drawback rules, customs and central excise duties drawback rules 2017. So that you have to understand. Very important. I'm again telling that you can expect around minimum 8 marks. So when I talk about 8 marks, it is a huge. Out of your 25 marks, if I tell 8 minimum marks, 8 to 10 marks, if you get questions only from this area, it is a bonus. Minimum 8 marks. At times it can be even 10 to 12. Very important set of rules. Regulations. There are a lot of regulations in your customs. No regulations were there in your GST, but there are a lot of regulations in customs where the power is given to CBSE. Friends, what is the difference? Constitution was already made by a committee headed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. When you talk about Act, it is passed by the Parliament. When you talk about rules, it is passed by the central government. When you talk about regulations, it is by Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs. Are there a lot of regulations in customs? Yes, but not applicable for exams. Few regulations that are applicable for exams we have discussed in your syllabus. Say for example, audit regulation rules is applicable for your exam, that we have discussed. Provisional assessment regulation is there applicable for exams, that we have discussed. So only few regulations are there for your exams. Very small regulations are there for your exams, that we have discussed. But are there a lot of regulations in customs? Yes. There are a lot of regulations in customs. Lot of regulations where the power is given to CBIC. CBIC. The difference between rules and regulation is, rules are made by central government, a higher authority. and regulations are made by CBIC, a lower authority, and both together are nothing but your delegated legislation. Both are called as delegated legislation along with your notifications also, right? So are there a lot of regulations in customs? Yes. Are we going to discuss few regulations? Yes. About audit and about provisional assessment, we are going to discuss regulations, right? 3 types of rules we are going to discuss and 2 types of regulations we are going to discuss when you talk about your audit and when you talk about your provisional assessment, right? Now what about notifications? Notifications are also part of delegated legislation, right? Either they are issued by central government or CBIC. For what? For issuing, amending or withdrawing exemption notifications or abatement notifications. Independent notifications are there. Central government or CBIC issues them, amends them or withdraws them. Or even when you talk about rules and regulations, for making, amending, withdrawing rules, first they come only by virtue of notification. The birth of the rules or the birth of the regulations is always by notification. See, notification you can categorize into 3 parts. For making rules, amending rules, withdrawing rules. For making regulations, amending regulations, withdrawing regulations. That is nothing but you are talking about the previous 2 points, rules and regulations. Third, independent notifications. They are not part of rules or regulations. Independent notifications. See, central government or CBIC will issue them, amend them and withdraw them. So there are independent notifications also. So that is all about your hierarchy. When you talk about your constitution done by a committee headed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, you are talking about acts, base acts that we are going to focus on: Customs Act 1962, Customs Tariff Act 1975, right? Parliament act is always by Parliament, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. And when you talk about your rules by central government, 3 important types of rules we are going to discuss: valuation, baggage and drawback, right? Regulations, there are a lot of regulations in customs, just like rules, but what is important for your exam is only audit regulation and provisional assessment. That is covered within your syllabus. Other regulations are not covered in your syllabus. Notifications are nothing but again part of delegated legislation, where there are 3 purposes. Either they are there to make rules, amend rules, withdraw rules. Make regulations, amend regulations and withdraw regulations. They are nothing but giving birth to rules and regulations. And independent notifications. They are not part of rules, they are not part of regulations. Independent notifications. Central government or CBIC issues independent notifications, amends them and withdraws them. Right, that is all about your coding part. Now friends, if you remember, there were a lot of circulars that we have discussed in your GST. And friends, I always tell that whenever it was all about circulars, relax, because circulars will not tell anything new. Please relax. Right, so you have to relax and understand the circular in a very simple way. Why circulars? First of all, they are not part of law. Very, very important point. Circulars are not part of law. What was law, friends? Law was equal to code, customs, case laws, and coding was constitution, act, rules, regulations, notifications. Alright, circulars are not part of law. This we would have discussed minimum 20 times or more than that during a discussion of your GST. Now we'll have more clarity on circulars. First, circulars are issued by whom? Circulars are issued by a body which you already discussed, CBIC. You will tell no, CBIC also issues regulations and notifications. True, but regulations and notifications are part of law. The power to issue regulation or to make independent notifications comes from either act or rules, right? Whereas when you talk about circulars, it does not comes from that. So circulars are issued by Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, right? For what? For uniformity in levy, classification, etc. So for uniformity in levy or classification or implementation of any other provisions. It may be for levy, it may be for classification, it may be for any other purposes. For uniformity in law, for having uniformity in levy of law or classification of law or any other provision of law. Third, now these points that we have not discussed. Now when we talk about circulars, till here we have discussed circulars are not binding on assessee and appellate authority, they are binding on your departmental offices. Now let us discuss much about your circulars. Now first few points that you already discussed in your GST. Right, circulars are issued by whom? CBIC. For what? Uniformity in law. Are they binding on assessee and departmental offices? No. So 3 important points that you have discussed, that circulars are issued by CBIC for uniformity, and when you talk about the binding nature, they are not binding on your assessee as well as your appellate authorities. When I tell appellate authorities, it is not only the first level, appellate authority, appellate tribunal, High Court and Supreme Court, but they are binding on departmental offices. They are binding on department. Friends, other few points that we are yet to discuss. These points we have already discussed in a GSE. Circulars are issued by CBIC, but they are not part of law. Circulars are not part of law. Right? CBIC, for the purpose of uniformity in levy, classification or any other provision of the Act, which is not binding on assessee or your appellate authorities, appellate tribunal, High Court, Supreme Court, but binding on the departmental officer. Now, if the circular is beneficial to the assessee, now let us understand that there is an issue where in customs you have a doubt whether the rate is 5% or 10% of BCD. Friends, we are not discussing GST, it is all customs where the basic customs duty rate is normally 5%, 7.5%, 10%. You may have different rates, even 70%. So there is no such a point that what are the types of BCD rates. It can be anything, but normal rates are 5, 7.5 and 10%. So there is a doubt on the basic customs duty rate being 5% or 10%. Now, circular tells, first circular tells, if at all I assume the circular tells it is 5%, and if at all I assume that circular tells the rate is 10%. If at all there is a circular which tells it is 5%, it is beneficial to assessee. And when I tell beneficial to assessee, it is obviously prejudicial to department. Prejudicial to your department. The moment anything is for assessee, it is against department. It is beneficial to the assessee but prejudicial to the department. Right. So when a circular is beneficial to the assessee, friends, it is having a retrospective effect, which means that, let us give a date. This issue, whether the rate is 5% or 10%, is right from say 2010. The circular is assumed that it is issued in 2020. Now, the circular which tells that it is 5%, it is beneficial to the assessee, which means assessee is not bound by the circular, but he won't challenge. See, it is for assessee, though assessee is not bound by the assessee, but he won't challenge because it is in favor of him, and department is unhappy. The assessee is happy because circular is in favor of assessee, therefore he will not challenge, though it is not binding on him, therefore, but he will not challenge because it is in favor of him. Department is sad. Why? The circular is against department, but department cannot challenge because circulars are binding on department. Right, so you have to even understand that. I'll repeat, if circular tells that it is 5%, assessee is happy, department is sad. When assessee is happy, though he is not bound by the circular, he will not challenge. Department is sad. Though department is sad, department cannot challenge the circular because circulars are binding on departmental officers. Right. So that first point you discussed. Now we are talking about the effective nature. This circular will be effective. Though it is issued in 2020, it will be effective right from 2010. Because the issue was starting in 2010 when some law was amended. So it is having retrospective effect. It will be effective right from year 2010, which means that you are talking about retrospective effect. Though the circular is issued in 2020, which is in favor of assessee is happy. Now it tells that it is effective right from 2010. Assessee is very happy. Very, very happy. Not only happy, very happy, because it will have its effect right from the beginning of the dispute. Alright, so that you have to understand. That important point you have to understand. And friends, if circular tells that it is 10%, second possibility. Now if circular tells that it is 10%, it is prejudicial to assessee. It is against assessee, and it is beneficial to department. It is in favor of department. Now assessee is not happy. Right, when assessee is not happy, can he challenge the circular? Yes, he can very much challenge the circular. He can tell that no, I am not following the circular, I want to challenge the circular. He can go for appeals. Officer will give him notice and order telling that you have to pay 10%, but assessee will tell that no, I'll pay only 5%, he can go for appeals because assessee is not bound by the circular. So that you have to understand. Assessee is sad, but no need to worry, assessee can challenge the circular because circulars are not part of law and they are not binding on assessee. Right, and moreover, such type of circulars which are against assessee are having effect only from, are having their effectiveness will be only from 2020. Assuming that the circular was issued in 2020, though the dispute was right from 2010, but the circular is issued in 2020, effectiveness of the circular, this circular will be effective only from 2020, which means assessee need not worry about the prior time. Assessee need not worry about the prior time. Right, so this circular is having only prospective effect. Prospective effect. So, if you look at the summary of both the points, if a circular is beneficial for the assessee, rather than telling 10%, circular is telling that it is 5%. The dispute was right from 2010, but the circular is given in 2020. If a circular is beneficial for the assessee is happy. He'll not challenge, though it is not binding on him, he'll not challenge because circular is in favor of assessee. Right, department is not happy because it is prejudicial to department, but department cannot challenge. Assessee is happy because circular is in favor of him, therefore assessee will not challenge. Department is sad because circular is against department, but department cannot challenge because circulars are binding on department. Right, and it will have its effect right from the date of issue, the date when all these issues started, whether it is 5% or 10%. It will have retrospective effect. Right, the effect, though the circular is issued in 2020, it will have its effect right from 2010 when the issue started about 5% or 10%. And friends, if a circular is prejudicial to assessee, against the assessee, when I tell prejudicial to assessee, rather than telling 5%, the circular said it is 10%. Assessee was expecting 5%, but circular said it is 10%. Right, if it is prejudicial to the assessee, it is beneficial for the department. Now, assessee is sad. But wait, assessee is sad, can he challenge the circular? Yes. Now assessee is sad, but he can challenge the circular. He can always challenge the circular because circulars are not binding on assessee. He is sad, but not very sad. He can challenge the circular. Right. Now one more important point for the assessee. This circular is issued in 2020, but the dispute was right from 2010. When circulars are against the assessee, right, first important point, it is not binding on the assessee can challenge. Second important point, it will have only prospective effect. The circular will have effect only from the date of issue of circular, that is 2020. It will not have retrospective effect. Though the circular was given for a matter in 2020 for an issue which was right from 2010, the circular which is against the assessee, prejudicial to the assessee, will have only prospective effect, which means that it will have effect only from the date of issue of circular. So that you have to understand, my friends. Now if I tell you theoretically, it's very simple. It is always on the safer side of the assessee. Circulars which are beneficial for the assessee will have retrospective effect right from the date of issue, and circulars which are against the assessee will have prospective effect. Only from the date of issue of circular. Circulars which are beneficial to assessee will have retrospective effect right from the date when that matter was subject to litigation. From the date when all this dispute started, right from the date of dispute, rather than calling it as issue, right from the date of dispute. Right, in our example, 2010. Circulars which are prejudicial to the assessee, against the assessee, they will have prospective effect, will have effect only from the date of your issuance of circular, only from 2020. And one more important point, these circulars can be challenged by the assessee. If I had to write few important notes here, circulars which are beneficial to the assessee, right, it will have one more advantage for the assessee, telling that it will have a retrospective effect from an old date. Plus, assessee is happy, so assessee will not try to challenge it. Department is not happy, but department cannot challenge. Who is not happy? Department. Can department challenge? No, department cannot challenge. In the second case, as circulars are against the assessee, first is it will have only prospective effect only from the date of issuance of circular. And second thing is assessee can challenge. Why? Circulars are not binding on assessees. Assessee can challenge. So these two important points you have to understand. Now, binding nature of circular, I think we have discussed this for long. Circulars are binding on department. However, circulars are not binding on assessees and appellate authorities. Circulars are not binding on assessees, and when I tell appellate authorities, it is Commissioner Appeals, right? In GST, it was GST Appellate Tribunal. Here it is Customs, Excise, Service Tax Appellate Tribunal, High Court and Supreme Court. It is not binding on Commissioner Appeals, CESTAT. It's not GST Appellate Tribunal, it is CESTAT, Customs, Excise, Service Tax Appellate Tribunal, High Court and Supreme Court. Right. Now, there is another important point when you talk about circular. The last point rather when you talk about your circular. Assume that there is a dispute with respect to your BCD rate, which is telling that it is 5%. The issue is whether it is 5% or 10%. Assume that there is a circular which is given on the subject matter, and the circular tells it is 5%, which means the circular is beneficial to assessee and prejudicial to department. Assessee is not happy, assessee is very happy, and though it is not binding on him, he will not challenge it because it is in favor of assessee. Department is not happy, but department cannot challenge. Department cannot challenge. Why department cannot challenge the circular? Because circulars are binding on department. Now friends, this circular, this issue was right from say year 2010, and circular is issued in 2020. Circular is issued in 2020. Suddenly, one of the departmental officer finds that there was a Supreme Court judgment. On this subject matter, which has said that the right rate is 10%, which has come very recently. Say before or immediately after the issuance of circular. Either it can be before circular or immediately after issuance of circular. It can be any time, before circular or after circular. There is a Supreme Court judgment which has said it is 10%. Now the question is, if you see the circular which is issued by your CBIC, it tells it is 5%. And if you see the Supreme Court judgment tells it is 10%. Now friends, whether, and if at all departmental officer goes by Supreme Court judgment, departmental officer can serve show cause, can challenge the circular, and if department is going only by circular, departmental officer cannot challenge the circular. It cannot, when I tell it cannot challenge the circular, I am trying to tell that it cannot issue show cause notice and demand order on the assessee. When I tell this, I am trying to tell that departmental officer cannot give show cause notice and demand order. To the assessee. And when I tell departmental officer can ignore circular, I am trying to tell that departmental officer can serve show cause notice and demand order on the assessee. Now, which one departmental officer has to follow? Simple question. This actually went up to Supreme Court. Whether circular is more important or Supreme Court judgment is more important, this matter went up to Supreme Court. I am repeating, whether circular is important or Supreme Court judgment is important, this matter went up to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was deciding whether circular is more important or your Supreme Court judgment you have to rely. Whether you have to rely on circular or Supreme Court judgment. Friends, a very simple understanding. Final conclusion was Supreme Court judgment is binding. Circulars are not at all part and parcel of law. So Supreme Court judgment will prevail over circular. Your Supreme Court judgment will prevail over a circular. Very simple reason. So friends, what departmental officer can do? Departmental officer can ignore the circular and go by Supreme Court judgment. Why? Simple reasoning. Supreme Court judgment is part and parcel of law. Law is nothing but combination of code, customs, case laws. Case laws cover Supreme Court judgment, whereas circular given by CBIC is not part and parcel of law. It's not part and parcel of law. And more importantly, Supreme Court judgment are the apex court. They are higher in authority rather than CBIC. When you compare the authority of Supreme Court and authority of CBIC, even in comparison of these authorities, you will find that Supreme Court judges are having higher authority. rather than the CBIC officials, Supreme Court judges have got higher authority. So forget about that authority point. Simple point. Supreme Court judgments are part of law. They are part and parcel of law. Whereas your CBIC circular is not part and parcel of law. Supreme Court judgment will even override your sections, rules and regulations. Forget about circular. Supreme Court judgment will even override. Supreme Court judgment can tell that this particular section or rule or regulation is not at all constitutional, or it is ultra virus, etc., etc. Right? That is the authority of Supreme Court judgment. And when you talk about this comparison, it is quite simple. Supreme Court judgment was part and parcel of law right from the beginning. It is part of law. Law is combination of code, customs, case laws. Case laws, you are talking about High Court and Supreme Court judgments. Priority is given to Supreme Court judgments. Whereas circulars are not part and parcel of law. Supreme Court judgments, when I tell they are part and parcel of law, I am trying to tell that law is always binding on assessee as well as department. Law is always binding on assessee as well as department. When you talk about circulars are not binding on assessee. They are binding only on department. Correct? Law, whether it is constitution or act or rules or regulations or notifications, coding, or whether it is case laws, or whether it is customary practices, old practices. So code, customs plus case laws, they are always binding on the assessee. Assessee cannot tell that I will select this provision, I don't like this provision, I will not go for it. So Supreme Court judgment becomes part of the law, therefore it is binding on all the assessees, all the departmental offices. Whereas circulars is not part of law, it is given for the purpose of, given by CBIC for the purpose of uniformity in levy, classification or any of the provisions of the Act, and they are binding only on departmental offices. They are not binding on assessee and appellate authorities. They are binding only on departmental offices. Right. So it was very, very fairly held that Supreme Court judgment will prevail over circular. And this is in this scenario, when Supreme Court judgment will prevail over circular. What was circular telling? 5%. What is the Supreme Court judgment telling? 10%. Now when I tell Supreme Court judgment will prevail over circular, right, this point that the circular is void ab initio. So this point that departmental officer is bound by the circular will not be there. So now departmental officer are not at all required to go by the circular. They can give show cause notice and demand order. Why? Circular has become void ab initio, which means that there is no such circular at all. Circular has become void ab initio. When I tell circular has become void ab initio, it is as good as there is no such circular. Therefore, departmental officer need not worry about the circular. They will go by the Supreme Court judgment. When they see Supreme Court judgment, it is 10%. They have the right to give show cause notice and followed by demand order on the assessee. So that is the important point that you have to understand. That was the last point of the circular. If you see binding nature of the circulars are binding on department. However, if there is a circular which is contrary to the provisions of Supreme Court judgment or High Court judgment, that circular is void ab initio. That circular is void ab initio means it is not at all there, void right from the beginning. And department may ignore the stand taken by the board in such circulars because that circular is not into existence. That circular is not at all into existence. Right? These are the important points of the circulars. If I summarize it, circulars are issued by CBIC for the purpose of uniformity in levy, classification or any of the provisions of the Act. And circulars which are beneficial to the assessee and prejudicial to the department, they have retrospective effect right from the dispute, the date when the dispute started. And circulars which are against assessee, prejudicial to the assessee, they have prospective effect. They have prospective effect. Only from the date of issuance of circular, they have prospective effect. Moreover, if circulars are beneficial to the assessee will not like to challenge it, but department would like to challenge it, but circulars are binding on department. And circulars which are prejudicial to the assessee, department is happy, assessee is not happy, but assessee can challenge the circular. Circulars are not binding on assessee and appellate authorities. When I tell appellate authorities, it is Commission Appeals, CESTAT, that is Customs, Excise, Service Tax, Appellate Tribunal, High Court and Supreme Court. Right. And one more important point, if at all there is a contradiction between circular and a Supreme Court or a High Court judgment, what will prevail? A Supreme Court judgment or a High Court judgment will prevail over the circular. In such a scenario, circular is void ab initio. Circular becomes void ab initio, void right from the beginning. And when circular is void ab initio, departmental officer can ignore the circular because it is as good as circular is not at all there. Circular is not at all there. So circular and Supreme Court judgment or High Court judgment, which will prevail? It is the Supreme Court judgment or High Court judgment which will prevail over circular because these judgments are part and parcel of law, whereas circular is not part and parcel of law. That being the case, circular will become void ab initio, and if circular has become void ab initio, departmental officer are not at all required to see the stand taken by the CBIC in the circular, because that circular is void ab initio. So these are all the important points that you understand. That is all about your circulars. And one more point that is there is trade notices. Trade notices are just like your circulars, just like your circulars. When you talk about your trade notices, they are just like your circulars. Now, only difference that you talk about in trade notices, you have to understand that the issuing authority of trade notices is Chief Commissioner or the Commissioner. Commissionerate issues the circular for the purpose of disseminating the information. Commissioner internally, Commissioner, your Principal Chief Commissioner or Chief Commissioner, your Principal Commissioner or Commissioner will give trade notices internally to the departmental officers for the purpose of giving the content of the notification in the circulars. It is only a circulating mechanism. Whatever is there in terms of notification and circulars, commissioner of each jurisdiction will give the information to the departmental officer so that they can read it. And all these points that you discuss in circulars are equally applicable for trade notices. Trade notices are also not part and parcel of law. The only difference that you find is circulars are issued by CBIC, whereas trade notices are issued by Commissionerate. Right, they are given by Commissionerate, that is Principal Chief Commissioner, Chief Commissioner, Principal Commissioner and Commissioner. Basically, trade notices are given only to disseminate the information. Whatever information came through notification, they will just tell, these are the recent notification, the recent circulars, please go through them. While performing your duty, you should be aware of these notification and these circulars. So, only it is nothing but dissemination of the information there in the notification and circular. Right. Are they part and parcel of law? No. So, when they are not part and parcel of law, again they are not binding on assessee and appellate authorities. They are binding only on departmental officers. All these points that you discuss in circulars are equally applicable for your trade notices. Friends, that is all about your circulars. I hope now you have got more clarity on the circulars. In GST also we have discussed about circulars, but in GST we have discussed only the basic points. Few extra points. That circulars which are beneficial for the assessee will have retrospective effect, and circulars which are prejudicial to the assessee will have only prospective effect. Right? These are the new points that you discuss. And another new point that you discuss is if there is a contradiction between a judgment of Supreme Court or High Court and circular, the judgment will prevail because it is part and parcel of law, and circular will not prevail because it is not part and parcel of law. Supreme Court or High Court judgment will prevail over your circular. In such circulars are void ab initio, they are void right from the beginning. Therefore, departmental officer need not see such circulars. Right. Now, friends, when you talk about the differences, when you talk about your GST and customs, basic differences when you talk about your GST and customs. GST birth article is Article 246A, whereas your customs, the birth article is Article 246 read along with Schedule 7 read along with List 1, Entry 83. Friends, when you talk about the base act of GST, they were by Parliament, IGST Act, CGST Act, UTGST Act, right, and the respective state GST Act passed by the state legislature. IGST Act, CGST Act and UTGST Act are passed by the Parliament. State will pass their respective GST Act. What is the base act here? Customs Act 1962. There was a special act in GST called as GST Compensation to States Act. GST Compensation to States Act 2017. Right, which is not there in customs. In customs, you have something called as Customs Tariff Act 1975. Whether you have any tariff act in GST? No, there is no tariff act in GST, as the rates of GST are given within notifications. Is there a tariff act in GST? No. Why? The rates applicable for the items in GST are given within the notifications. Whereas in customs, the rates are given under Customs Tariff Act 1975. Is there a tariff act in GST? No. Is there a tariff act in customs? Yes, Customs Tariff Act 1975. The rates in customs are given under Act, Customs Tariff Act 1975. The rates of GST are given by virtue of notifications, right? Not by Act, by way of notifications. There is no GST tariff act because the rates are given by notifications. Whether there is a special act in GST? Yes, GST Compensation to States Act 2017. Whether there are special acts in customs? Yes. You are talking about your foreign trade policy, right? So that foreign trade policy is by virtue of your Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992. Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992, by virtue of which you have something called as foreign trade policy. Even other allied laws is applicable. Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999 you have to follow. Customs has to be read along with allied laws. Customs law cannot be read independently. Customs law has to be read along with allied laws. Few allied laws are your Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act 1992, which gives the birth to your foreign trade policy. And when you're talking about FEMA 1999, FEMA Act 1999. These are only few allied laws. Customs cannot be read independently. Customs has always to be read along with allied laws. Customs has always to be read along with its allied or sister laws. Now, another important point about your GST is controlled only by Ministry of Finance, whereas your customs is controlled by Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Commerce. When you talk about your Ministry of Finance, this talks about your Customs Act 1962. Ministry of Commerce, when you talk about your foreign trade policy, that is your Foreign Trade Development and Regulations Act 1992, that is issued by your Ministry of Commerce. Customs is controlled by two ministries. Customs is controlled by two ministries, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Commerce, and therefore customs has to be read always along with allied laws. Very, very special point. Customs is controlled by two ministries, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Commerce. When you talk about Ministry of Finance, you're talking about the Base Act, Customs Act 1962 and Customs Tariff Act 1975. When you talk about Ministry of Commerce, that ministry is responsible for your Foreign Trade Development and Regulations Act 1992 read along with your foreign trade policy. So foreign trade policy is not by Ministry of Finance, it is given under Ministry of Commerce. Ministry of Commerce. So these are the important points that you have to understand when you talk about your GST and your customs. Difference between your GST and customs. Right, friends? Friends, if you see your ICA material, none of these points which are only occupying your 2 or 3 pages is given by your ICA content, but I wanted you guys to understand this basic stuff. Right, friends, understand that here and now we'll be differentiating your GST and customs. Why? For your examination, all the questions of GST and customs will come together. So you have to understand the fine differences between your GST and customs. You have to be very clear with the minute differences between GST and customs. Two things will happen. You will find law very clear. You will find customs as well as GST law very, very clear, so that you will not be confused. And second thing, it will be very helpful for your revision. There will be more clarity when we differentiate GST and customs. Here and there, again and again, we will be differentiating your GST and customs. Again and again, time and again, we will be differentiating your GST and customs. Right from the beginning till we end your customs, we will be differentiating your GST and customs. Two things, there will be more clarity. Second, you will be finding it very easier when you are revising. You will know, okay, these were the points very separately given in your GST and separately given in your customs. So you are going to have two important things when you compare your GST and your customs. So that is all about your introduction topic, where we discuss nothing new, nothing actually, that's nothing at all relevant for your exams. This is only to make your base strong. When you talk about again, what have we discussed? We have just discussed what is the meaning of law, which we already knew, and what is the meaning of code in terms of your customs. That is, what are the important points about the customs in your constitution, act, rules, regulations and notifications. Then we have spent some quality time in understanding much about circulars. Circulars, basic point we have discussed, but now we have discussed much about circular. Now you should not have any difference. Okay, what is the difference between regulations given by CBIC and circulars given by CBIC? One main difference, though both are given by CBIC, regulations given by CBI is part and parcel of law, binding both on assessee and department, whereas circulars given by CBIC are not part and parcel of law. They are not binding on the assessee and appellate authorities, they are binding only on departmental officers. Right, other differences, regulations are issued by CBIC because of the power given through act or rules, whereas CBIC are issued for different purposes, for having uniformity in levy, collection or any other provision of the act. So that is other differences, right? So you have to be very, very clear with that. And finally, we have discussed the differences between your GST and your customs with respect to your basic provisions, GST in India and customs in India. So that's all about your first introductory topic when you talk about your customs in India.